never been at a moment where I thought, oh, I am as good as I ever need to be. I don't need to improve. Everything is perfect. Perfect's the enemy of good. I get it, but man, I want to be better. Surgery's humbling. It doesn't matter how good you think you are. It will hit you in the face in a blink.
Welcome to the #1 show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, surgery is a very interesting thing in the medical world because for me, aside from the fact that it's very much like a symphony, right? Everything has to be set and done in a right way. Surgeons themselves are very much like athletes when you think about it, in terms of the grueling hours they have to put in, the attention to detail, their physical prowess in the operating room. And so I was always wondering, when is there going to be a company that kind of does what Nike does for athletes, but for surgeons? And that's who our guest is today. Big shout out to Mitch White. Mitch White is the president over at NG Medical for their U.S. Division. And Mitch kept telling me about, Dr. Robert Masson and his company, eXeX, which stands for Expanded Existence. He's like, you got to have this guy on the show. So I said, okay. And I've gotten many requests like this. I got on a quick Zoom with Dr. Masson, and we hit it off. I think that was a 15-minute meeting that turned into an hour. We just had so much fun talking to each other. We see so much eye to eye as in terms of leadership and innovation. So I had him on the show. And so let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Masson. So Dr. Masson is a neurosurgeon who practices out of Orlando, and specifically in spine surgery. He's an internationally recognized microneurosurgeon, but also he's an entrepreneur, an innovator, and inventor of a variety of technologies focused on lean surgical implants, procedures, and systems. He founded a company called eXeX, called Expanded Existence. You could definitely go check them out. I recommend you check out their website, expandedexistence.com, especially if you're a physician, right? And the idea is that the setup and workflow of surgical procedures, it's vital to a team's success and, of course, patient outcomes, right? The teams that work in them most often, they lack the resources for organization and have little time to prepare and optimize the procedure because they're focused on so many other things. So what eXeX does is that they create the future needed to improve the setup and workflow of the surgical space and improve the patient's outcome. They do this by combining AI and mixed reality through HoloLoops, which is a virtual reality headset, and they optimize the surgical procedure. So essentially, as I said, what Nike does when it comes to celebrating great athletes, eXeX is doing in terms of celebrating great surgical teams and optimizing their surgical workflow. Of course, the main use case for this right now is neurosurgery and spine, but really, if you're a urologist, general surgeon, you can be using eXeX. Again, this is not a sponsored episode by eXeX. Dr. Masson is my guest. But the reason why I started the State of MedTech is to highlight and find great physician leaders like this with really exciting and innovative companies. So that's what our episode is going to be about. We talk about his approach to surgery, his philosophy around innovation, of course, and we dive into the details of what it's like to create such a great company, and of course, his setup, because he has his OR and his headquarters all in one place. And so to foster that environment of innovation and product development is really amazing. Now, I want to remind the listeners, if you're a surgeon or a physician or a clinician of any kind, you get a free CE credit from this episode. So when you're done listening to this episode, check the show notes below, click that link, courtesy of our partners over at CMFI, and reflect on what did you learn and what will you do with information, and you get a free CE credit from that. And lastly, if you're a medtech company who's innovative and you realize that, hey, social media is probably the most scalable thing when it comes to driving product adoption, we want to work with you. Reach out to me over at the State of MedTech. Either shoot me a message on LinkedIn or send a message, email to hello@khateebandco.com. Okay. Khateeb & Co. That's my last name, KhateebAndco, or just go to khateebandco.com to book time. And we'd love to have you maybe sponsor one of our upcoming live streams, CME webinars, maybe a podcast. There's many other things that we do when it comes to working with companies to attract investors at scale, attract early adopters at scale, and drive pipeline, all using digital media and social media. So with that being said, enjoy our episode with Dr. Robert Masson of eXeX. Here we go. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. And just as a reminder, if you're a clinician, don't forget that this episode is CME eligible. You get an AMA PRA Category 1 CME credit for listening. So be sure to click the show notes below and unlock your credit. So we have a great guest on. So I get a lot of different requests and suggestions about different guests to come on. And, most of the time they're like lackluster. I kept hearing about Dr. Robert Masson and how I have to have him on. So I said, okay, let me have a conversation with the guy. And I think the 5 or 10 minute conversation turned almost into an hour. And I was like, man, we see so eye to eye when it comes to surgery, when it comes to innovation. He has a great story. In my opinion, he's living every surgeon's dream, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But Dr. Masson, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Omar. I'm thrilled to be here. No, I totally enjoyed that talk. I'll try to stay within the rails. I know I have
this is a show to go off the rails. Let me tell you, go off the rails. If there's one show you should go off the rails, it's this one. So we got a lot to talk about, but maybe for the listeners who are just learning about you now, maybe we can start with a simple question of who's Robert Masson? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Where did you train? If you can kind of paint that picture for us.
No, thank you. Yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles, single mom, played football in high school, went to college at the University of Florida on a football scholarship. That's how I had to pay for college, and didn't, that ended in my sophomore year. 5th concussion, simultaneous probation for the program, and I got into a 7-year BSMD honors program at UF and accepted it. Crossroads, never looked back. So, a biomedical engineer, always passionate about sports. My family's lifeblood is sports, and of several types. So this sort of competitive performance edge is very natural to me. I wanted to be an astronaut. Most people don't realize my goal wasn't to be a doc or a surgeon. I love science. I love medical science. I went to med school as part of that program, but my goal was to be a shuttle biomedical engineer. And ultimately, when the Challenger blew up, it kind of sidelined that. Crossroads again. I was asked to apply for neurosurgery training, accepted, never looked back. So 35 years later, here we are.
That's amazing. And, what's fascinating is, the fact that, it's not. So let me give you my experience with most neurosurgeons. Most neurosurgeons, they're a different breed of surgeons, in my opinion, right? It's almost like if you took the best of like two worlds, if you took like sort of the action-oriented, sort of aggressive approach that surgeons usually have from a personality standpoint, but then combined it with the very high IQ and, let's think about this, that you get from internal medicine and combine them into one person, right? But I've never met a neurosurgeon who played D1 football. This is like a first. So if you gave me a list and say, hey, this surgeon's going to come on your show, they were a D1 football player, I would have been like, okay, either ortho, perhaps urology, maybe general surgery.
Well, let me throw props out to Myron Roll. So Myron Roll is, I follow him a little bit, but I don't know if he's really a neurosurgeon or almost done with training. But he was a legit D1 football player, Rhodes Scholar, FSU, played at the highest level on TV, and I didn't quite make it to the off of left bench. I played, but nothing like Myron. So kudos to Myron. He's a real dude.
Well, and you're really lucky, I will say, because like you played back in the day where traumatic brain injury was not a thing, and like at least when you were playing college football, I was still a kid, but I just remember back then there were like, I don't even think there was the rule, the red zone rule, where if you're returning a punt, like you can't hit the guy 5 yards. That was not even there. Like, so in college, people just laid people out to make it on ESPN. So you played in a rough time.
Yeah, Wilbur Marshall gave me my fifth concussion, and I woke up in the hospital. It was in the spring game in my sophomore year. At that point, I had a legitimate shot at starting going into my junior year in the fall, and had a great game. That morning, I was okay. This is my moment. I'm going to be starting for the Gators in the fall, and was never in pads again after that day. So, yeah, football is one of those gladiator sports where your career can end in a moment, but in those days, yeah, there was no contact for quarterbacks. We were sitting ducks, and it was
That's
1982.
unbelievable.
Yeah, so
What position did you play?
in college I was quarterback. In high school, free safety and quarterback.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
wish I had stayed a free safety because I never got hurt once targeting
yeah,
people.
it's a great position. Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like free safeties, kickers, and punters. It's like you're for
Yeah,
the most part pretty safe.
yeah.
Um, when you decide to go into neurosurgery, I got to ask this because a lot of residents do listen to the show. When I was in medical school like over 10 years ago, everybody had an idea of what they wanted to go into, and the advice we were given was like, you actually don't know, and you're going to go into where your personality fits the most. What about neurosurgery? Kind of like what attracted you to neurosurgery, and how did you come to the conclusion like, yeah, I should be a neurosurgeon?
Honestly, for me, it was more circumstantial. But when I look back on that question, the two that I would have found myself in if I was targeting surgery as a career would have been cardiothoracic or neurosurgery. I love the intensity. I love the severity. I love the technical detail, the consequences of technical detail. I mean, everything about all of that. As it was, I was doing research in stem cell biology of spinal cord injury as part of a graduate research program. And so I was doing animal surgery basically on spinal cord injury models and then monitoring how stem cells regrew, encourage growth, gliosis, all the different parameters. And one of my goals was to do zero gravity neuronal growth in space shuttle and show how gravity influences nerve cell development, particularly within the central nervous system. So it was that project that I guess, I had decent hands and it was recognized. And so that was one of the things that got attention. Neuroscience on that project was in the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Florida. And we had the world expert in stem cell biology of spinal cord injury, Paul Reier, PhD, Dr. Paul Reier, and he was in charge of that program in the Department of Neurosurgery. So it was a perfect, culture dish for me, given my science goals intertwined with, my real goals, but ultimately it led to neurosurgery. And I love neuroscience. Even now, biological science of neuroscience in humans translates so beautifully to artificial intelligence. And I'm a big fan of information processing of
Interesting.
all types.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be alive these days just because, look, like, I think there's like two types of exploration. There's explorations that are like outside of this planet, and then there's exploration like within the mind, because there's so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we still don't really exactly understand, like, how does thoughts and memories, like, how does all that work? Like, why do we dream,
Yeah.
And I think especially now, I mean, we're all walking cyborgs at this point, like, because we all have an iPhone in hand, and so the singularity is like slowly happening. Do you agree with some of the work that Ray Kurzweil like puts out? I was always wondering what your thoughts were on his work.
Yeah. Regarding what, the convergence?
The conversion into
Yeah.
singularity.
Yeah. I do, but I think the messaging gets so distorted depending on how people interpret it.
I agree.
From me, it goes back to my chairman in neurosurgery, honestly. So Albert Rodin was my chair, and he's broadly known as the father of micro neurosurgical anatomy of the brain. And he's legendary if you're in the neurosurgery circle. And one of his famous quotes is, "The brain is the crown jewel of creation." And when you think about it relative to biological intelligence, it's absolutely true. And in the argument about artificial intelligence, the goods, the bads, the uglies, everyone gets lost in translation for the negative power of AI, where the reality is, especially at this level, we're not even at the point where quantum computing is going to accelerate artificial intelligence to more than binomial expression of data points. The electrical intelligence and biological intelligence is done at room temperature, 98.6 in humans, and it can do what quantum computers need absolute zero to accomplish. And so we're nowhere near biological intelligence in the synthesized or artificial intelligence space. So I think I look at AI as the extension of human intelligence, or the extension of biology.
I agree. I completely agree with that. And that's why I think, like, I don't know, I think AI is interesting. It could go in a variety of different directions as a like benefit to human beings or a threat. But the thing I have to remind people, I'm like, AI was developed by humans, and so
Right.
I mean, like ChatGPT was impressive, but ChatGPT, in my opinion, because I use it all the time, it's kind of like an idiot savant. Like it's
Right.
something, oh my God,
Yeah.
this thing is brilliant. And then other times I'm looking at it at what it's trying, and I try and help it along, and I'm like, ChatGPT. Let me just, I'm going to take it over from here.
Yeah, it's the subtlety, nuance, contextual stuff. It doesn't have that. It's got massive ability to sift through data and details. But
Yeah, and I think the thing that people have to understand is, like, we're not at real AI doesn't really exist yet. We're kind of like a narrow AI,
Right.
And so, before we kind of move on, I wanted to ask you. So, like, apprenticeship and mentorship is a big theme in medicine. It's part of the history and culture of it. I'm wondering. First, I want to ask you about Dr. Rattan. What was a very memorable thing that Dr. Rattan told you or taught you, and how did that change you as a surgeon?
Yeah, another one of his famous quotes is, "There is no finish line." And lifelong, I've always had this foundational philosophy of, you're as good as your next race. You're always pushing forward. You're always leaning forward. And so he was very holistic in how he perceived his role as a master cranial neurosurgeon. He always made it about the humanity that he was privileged to take care of. Neurosurgery has the potential to become dehumanized in a way. Amazing procedure, amazing science, amazing technology, but it starts to separate itself from the humanity. And one of the things that was so powerful about growing under Al Roden was his deep connection to his purpose, which was to serve humanity. And that always resonated with me. One of the things that you see if you keep your eyes wide open in neurosurgery is, and it's a gift, it's a superpower to be able to do this. I wasn't able to. There's a coldness to it, and if you are cold to the humanity side, it's easier to manage the emotional trauma of cranial neurosurgery, because there's a lot of baggage that goes with it. And ultimately, one of the low bar reasons why it was easy for me to pivot from cranial neurosurgery to spine was just sort of a pivot towards more optimism, because I didn't get a lot of, when I was young, I got a lot of gratification out of how amazing the technical aspect of what I was doing was. But it started to build, particularly when I had kids, where, it didn't matter if I did a great case if the person was severely brain injured, or, beginning and end, or if they had a malignant glioma and they were going to die in 4 months, or, there was a futility at times to horrible traumatic brain injury or catastrophic aneurysm rupture, so, you always could find focus on why you were there and what you were trying to do, but it's a deep, dark specialty, and you have to have pretty thick skin. So for me, it was he taught me and encouraged me and reassured me that the humanistic approach within neurosurgery had profound value to how I could find my best role in it. And ultimately, I found it a lot more congruent, mixed my love of sports, technique, performance, everything into spine, because I saw such huge opportunity in spine surgery for transcendence. Spine surgery was not being done in the 90s anywhere near the level of cranial neurosurgery. So it was really easy to pivot, given a variety of things.
Yeah, no, that's and it's spine surgery is it's a very interesting field because it's a lot what spine and neurosurgery to the extent it's a lot more newer than other areas of medicine. Before we get into this, there's one other question I got to ask, and I'll give you a moment to think about this. But so like my father is a general surgeon. He trained at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, and so like pre 2000s. I mean, surgical residency's tough still, but it was like really rough pre 2000, really rough. And so I'm wondering, you have a war story, something what was something that was such a painful experience for you that changed you for the better?
Gosh, I don't know if I have one story that fits that. I have infinite stories that fit that in a 7-year time warp. I was in that era, by the way, and it's not barefoot in the snow in Florida. We worked 130 hours a week often. Every other night in-house call, you'd go in at 5:36 in the morning. When I started residency, you'd be out 8:39 the next night, back at 5:30 the next morning. I mean, it was like that. There was no 60-hour clock. I'll be careful not to offend the sensitivities of the current generation right now, but it was real. It was severe. But there was one experience I'll never forget. It was the perfect storm, the biggest nightmare of all. And I was on call, one senior resident, I was a junior resident. There's a school in Florida for disabled children that had sent a group of about 60 of their kids on a school bus for a field trip. And there was a rollover accident on I-75. So we received in a 2-hour period about 40 kids with a variety of, neurological impairments, normally in their normal state, with no information, no medical history, no witnesses who could give us baselines. All of them were in a severe rollover accident. We had to mobilize a few people that could come in and help, but it was a 2.5-day slog to triage, to organize, to establish baselines. I mean, we were doing routine scans of everybody based on severity of neurological conditions. Some people actually had worse baselines than people who had severe brain injury. And we were scanning the wrong person first because we had no baseline. It was a nightmare. It was the most stressful 2 days of my training program by a mile. And I don't know what the effect it had on me was, but managing sheer chaos in an impossible environment, I'll never forget it. It was your worst nightmare. And it definitely had an impact, but I can't tell you how.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I feel like every surgeon has like stories like that just like, it just changes your life. You just never forget it, Yeah. So just kind of, moving into, I guess, the main topic around like innovation and expanded existence. So, being a spine surgeon / neurosurgeon, you're already busy, right? You got plenty to do. It's, you also have a big family. So like, it's not like you needed more stuff to do. And I think this is where we kind of joked about it, where, if you look at like somebody like Elon Musk, Elon Musk is busy he has Tesla, he has SpaceX, he has Neuralink. He's got like, I don't know, with like 9 or 10 kids now. And for him, he's just like, yeah, I'm going to buy Twitter. And it's just like one of those things where you have this thing inside of you where you just can't help but be an entrepreneur and an innovator. Like he can't help himself. Do you feel like you're the same way? Because like with all that you're already doing, like why start a company like Expanded Existence? Like what sparked that?
I in some ways I identify to his characterization, but like the Twitter thing is different. Like I don't see myself going off into some tangential world where I mediate popular opinions back and forth. That doesn't interest me at all. On the other hand, like relative to all the different roles I can play within my industry, yes, very much so. I'm a little bit of a control freak. I'm an obsessive compulsive, pretty much in everything I can perform in, and so I've ended up, running my own practice. I'm unemployable. I own my own buildings. I own my own surgical facilities now, one in Orlando, one in Park City. Obviously worked in hospitals for 3 decades, but now I'm 100% outpatient. And I've taken all of the surgical procedures I do and got them to the point where we establish clinical pathways through building a JCO certified center of excellence in spine. We've got minimally invasive and recovery profile to do complex reconstruction, cervical and lumbar outpatient. They walk out in 2-3 hours. So, I've created all these layers of expression where really it was more about me controlling all aspects of my deliverable to my community. And then, now we get to this aging surgeon category where, you already hit your limit as far as volume. You've already hit your limit as to impact of surgeries per year, in every aspect of the delivery system. But when I've trained a lot of surgeons in arthroplasty, I've trained a lot in my platform, which is IMAS. It's a TLIF based microsurgical reconstruction platform. I built products for Synthes and DePuy and Biedermann Motec now. And all of that is just always trying to, basically a lifelong malcontent. I'm never quite good enough, so I'm always trying to improve. Well, the question I get most from the surgeons I've trained isn't about the widgets. It isn't about even the procedures. It's always been about the organization, how lean my OR is, how efficient my back table is. My Biedermann system, my pedicle screw system, MOS 100, is one tray. My steerable cage, Telix K, that I built, it's my 3rd generation steerable cage I've built, is one tray. Matrix was something I regrettably was heavily involved with. So I was a primary developer for it for Synthes, and it rolled into DePuy. It ended up being 23 trays because of all of the input from all of the sales-based KOLs that, big companies use to justify innovation in a rollout to generate sales on the back end. But I was embarrassed to be part of that because it was absolutely the opposite of my DNA, which is lean, best of class performance. So, when we got to software, I saw a tremendous opportunity with the introduction of some of the techs of the teens, with AI starting to come to fruition, with mixed reality and augmented reality, sort of giving me a glimpse of the opportunity to get to the sterile field of the OR. I realized, wow, we can really transcend surgical performance, organization, tracking, predictive analytics. There's about to be an epiphany where we can go from retrospective, peripheral, macro view of surgical environments to living, breathing, internal analysis of surgical execution and performance. And so I saw that as a big opportunity to, take our core values and philosophy and translate it into active surgical management, logistics, and performance. And that's kind of where I find myself now.
That's amazing. And, I want to go back to that day, but if you don't mind, we're going to talk a lot about it. I want to read from your LinkedIn profile, which you wrote about expanded existence, because I think it's a really good summary about the company, but then we kind of sort of expand on that, pun intended, by the way. So expanded existence built a revolutionary holographic surgery software application called Asset Library of surgical tools, equipment, and devices. It creates real-time digital twin of the operating room for every surgeon, every surgery, and every operating room. The data from every surgery is captured using mixed reality headset and is analyzed for best practices using a closed artificial intelligence system. Mixed reality is used to interact with all the equipment and tools from within the surgical sterile field, giving best information possible to the surgical team at all times. It is changing the way surgery is organized and executed, and boldly taking surgery out of the 20th century and firmly into the deep 21st century. Really well written, by the way. I like that a lot. Now, here's my first question to you. On here, you started, it may not be the exact date, but February 2017 is where you have your role as CEO and founder of Expanded Existence. What I want to know is what was going on and what was in your mind in January, or not in January, in December 2016, so a few months prior, that catalyzed you to do this move?
Wow. Here's where I go off the rails. So
Perfect. It took us 20 minutes, but like let's go off the rails now.
Yeah. No, actually, 2017 we were. That's when the partnership came together to explore a new concept. So 3 months before that, I had deviated aggressively with my oldest son. I have 5 kids. And as a younger neurosurgeon, again, this is going to be meandering. I apologize.
No, please. The audience wants to hear this.
My oldest kids got the least of me until late. So
because that was when you were starting your practice and doing a lot of things. This is when you had to make a lot of sacrifices.
Yeah, I mean, I was deadbeat dad to my older kids, regrettably.
That I'll tell you, Dr. Masson, it takes it takes a lot to say something like that. I have a tremendous respect for you for saying that. Sorry, please continue. I just had to address that.
No, thank you. But I'm good at making up for I was going to say shit, but I'll say stuff.
This is a late back podcast. Go for it.
Yeah. So my oldest son, he was a really strong athlete, Team USA baseball, Team Florida. It turns out I overdid the pressure and he hated baseball, but he always wanted to race go-karts, race cars. And so for his 16th birthday, I got him a Skip Barber Formula Racing School thing. And well, I chaperoned him up there, and this was the beginning of a little journey that in retrospect, honestly taught me more about myself than anything I had ever done in my life. And, but so I'm there, I'm chaperoning him. And the next thing you know, a dad's handing me an umbrella to hold over his head because it's hot out there. And I couldn't take it. So I went to the race director and signed up for the course. And so you had a 51-year-old neurosurgeon signed up with some of the best 15, 16, 17-year-old go-karters in the country all of a sudden. So day one, he kicked my ass. 10 seconds a lap at Road Atlanta. I spent the next 6 years chasing him. So in 2016, I was in my second year of that. I was starting to close the gap. My whole journey, I was closing the gap, and he ended up being my coach. But we really got pretty far along in a prototype racing sort of pseudo career, and I was in 2 Rolex 24s as his teammate. When he was 19, he won the Rolex 24 at Daytona. 2 years later, we came in second as teammates. So that whole
that's awesome.
lot, yeah. So that was kind of the where I was right before we came together. And so when we started looking at how do we architect surgical performance software, I was like, cool, I'm racing prototypes. I go to the track, I do laps, we analyze every turn, every braking zone, every full throttle zone. Racing is about braking and full throttle. If you're not on the brake, you're full throttle, you gently lift, but you're either full throttle. And surgery is the same thing, and every surgery's got, a braking zone, a safe zone, and so it really organically was easy to compare. And then you look at, how racing teams in F1 and in advanced prototype racing analyze every piece of the car relative to every microsecond in every braking zone and every turn and every piece of the lap. It's always about optimizing the lap. And my compulsion in surgery has been every case micro expressions to optimize the lap, the surgery. So I really started organically architecting how are we going to build a software system that can really scrutinize the details of surgical performance in all of surgery. And so it was that natural, fertile environment of borrowing from something you're passionate about and love. But it was all, again, way off piste, a journey with my firstborn. And that ended up being one of the most amazing experiences of my life.
Now, I love that you share that. And this is also kind of validates my belief that there's no such thing as like work-life balance. Like it's all just one life. And I think that if you learn how to put them in harmony and reflect on them, that's when you can, sort of move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs and get to self-actualization,
Totally agree.
You described so it's expanded existence, but you guys refer to it as eXeX. So
Right.
you say eXeX is pretty much like Moneyball for surgery. And for those who may not be familiar, although I don't know how you don't know it because it's a really well known movie, but Moneyball was a movie about I think it was the Oakland A's, but essentially a pro baseball team,
Right.
and the management who decided to recruit players not based on what they were seeing, but based on the data, right, and the
Right.
nuance within the data.
Right.
I always saw, there's this parallel between surgery and sales, believe it or not, that I always saw, which is, you're like a pro athlete. And so like the smallest things actually make a big difference. Like, for example, in surgery, just, I'm not a surgeon, but the way you place your trays, where everyone stands in the room, the smallest things like reaching for a tool a certain time. If you do that 4 or 5 times within a surgery, if it's not placed in the right place, that compounding effect can either go in your favor or against it, right?
Right.
Is that kind of like in a nutshell what eXeX is doing, which is how do we fine tune all these little components within the surgery so in some optimize the outcomes? Is that would you describe it like that?
Yeah, but it's even more granular than that. There are so many metrics. There's organization, there's sequence, there's which tools at which time. What are 90% used tools? What are 10% used tools? How does it affect the cost of the surgeon? How does cost ultimately affect performance? Is high expense necessarily congruent with best outcomes? Sometimes it can be distracting or confusing and interfere with the focus of what the objective of the case was. So, technology used well is best of class, but technology done without context towards the objective of the surgery can really distract. And so I think there's an optimization point for any tool, for any technique, for any technology. And as a surgeon, you're always kind of aiming towards that sweet spot. So when I look at Moneyball in sports at large, because it turns out that deep analytics absolutely transcended the quality of performance in major professional sports and multiple sports, not just baseball at this point. And it's become the way it works. And, I don't know another industry that benefits more from that philosophy, and that, you can also get deeply biased by an obsession for deep data, because data can be, biased, it can be confusing. There's still an art, there's still data, but the best of all possible subtlety, the convergence, the singularity, is really the sweet spot of remembering the context of what you're trying to accomplish and using the data in a way that never disconnects from that ultimate objective. And in surgery's case, the ultimate objective is best of class patient care to most of class people. And so there's one individual at a time. Neurosurgery is an unbelievable individual sport. I can't even imagine a medical profession more focused on the individual. When you look at the medical economics of managing a malignant brain tumor, for example. But on the other hand, the world has access to care problems and democratization of quality of healthcare and access to healthcare problems. And so the economics actually plays a role. And God knows everybody in highly developed countries feels the burn of the massive expense of healthcare. And I would argue that a lot of that expense is artificial. And, it's just, chaos and disorganization has an enormous consequence on indirect best of class access to care and democratization of care. And we can do better. Sustainability is an issue. They're just, so when I say Moneyball, there are several components. There's quality of care, there's best possible outcomes, there's sustainability, effect on access to materials. The pandemic exposed access to materials, access to employees, access to team members. Every major hospital I know, all my friends, the best places in the world, they can't get dedicated team members. Whether it's scrub techs or circulating nurses or any of the assets. So there's a big expanding problem of burnout that everyone's talking about. To me, that can all be improved by balanced performance. And so, I don't like the game of complaining and whining about how bad it is. When I see a problem, I like to solve the best I possibly can. And, if you fail, you tried. You're always going to do better if you try. So when I look at this sprawling, whining and droning of the problems in healthcare worldwide right now, publicly, I just scream opportunity. It's just, adversity is a problem yet solved. And so, this is the best I know how to do to try to solve that problem.
Oh, 100%. And that definitely resonates with me. I mean, when I spent about a little over a decade in this industry, and I kind of, in my own way, helped usher in like sort of a new age of marketing, even though the industry's still really behind. But when I decided to start my own business, a lot of my friends in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, that is, they're like, dude, why are you going back to medtech? Why don't you start something in tech or SaaS? I'm like, have you looked at medtech? Do you know how many problems there are? I'm like, all I see is a lot of opportunity. But yeah, very much like you. I mean, I don't like complaining. I mean, I complain like any other human being, but like I like to do something about it, And so at least on the med tech and company side, there's a lot of complaining about access to physicians and it's difficult and everything. I'm like, well, have you changed the way you deliver education and engagement and sales and marketing and everything? And
yeah,
we're in the early stages, but this is my mission to change this industry is like a 10, 15-year plan, maybe 20-year plan. And so, we're in the early stages. Going back to eXeX, one thing that's interesting is that when it comes to developing product, like for me, I started my career in robotics, is going to the room and watching and observing the workflow, the steps, the sequences, because then you have these insights where you're like, oh, this procedure or this part of the procedure might have these 8 steps. 3 or 4 of those actually are not, they're not required, right? And actually, Elon Musk has an operating system for all design. It's called the algorithm. It's like 5 steps, and one of those things is just like get rid of stupid steps and everything.
Yeah, that's a foundational Kaizen philosophy. Always analyze the workflow and everything else. And no, IMAS, my lumbar reconstruction platform, it wasn't built on adding new steps or new tech. To your point, it was built on subtraction. I don't need this. K-wire, for instance. Once upon a time, you started with an X-ray image, then you put a K-wire in, then you chased it with a tap, then you chased it with a screw. It wasn't long before we subtracted the K-wire, and then the tap became the driver, and then you just subtract, and that's how you get to lean, high-level performance is subtraction. Absolutely.
I completely agree with that. So with eXeX, first of all, it's applicable to, this approach is applicable really to any surgery, but of all the surgeries out there, is spine the best use case for it? Is it something else? And then what procedures?
I would argue complex surgery is the best use case of any kind. I'll give you a few examples. I mean, there's no question why we're starting in spine and we've evolved to ortho. Spine is my home. It's obviously what I know. We have a living lab. We iterate everything in our own facilities. Our dev team works in the same building as my surgery facility, and we're constantly architecting everything that we do based on live experience in real surgery. So spine is the obvious starting point. It's also practically important because it's a very high revenue specialty. It's very sophisticated. It's got a lot of complexity, a lot of different solutions, a lot of different tools, a lot of techniques, a lot of equipment pieces. So yeah, spine is an obvious example. We're doing a demo with a friend of mine who's one of the premier fetal neurosurgery surgeons on the planet at Arnold Palmer Children's Hospital in a couple of weeks. He's got an obstetrics team, a perinatal team, a neurosurgery team, and a thoracic vascular team just in case. In every case they do on a mom with a baby in utero that they have to do a myelomeningocele repair or endoscopic ventriculostomy or something like that. Talk about a complex symphony. Any surgery that has a symphony, transplant surgery, multiple teams, multiple scrub techs, multiple expert team members that need to inter collaborate in real time on somebody. Those are all ultimately targets for the best use case for this kind of process. But we're iterating it, we're architecting, and we're going to market in spine and ortho. And, it's just the most obvious first step.
Yeah. And I think, especially when I think about spine, because I mean, so I got my career start in spine. I mean, there's a lot of complexity, but even when I was in rooms, for simple like L4, L5 fusion, like there's some rooms where I was in and it's like they knew exactly what they were doing, what they needed, et cetera. And there are other rooms where I'm like, man, there's like a lot of trays in here. Like, do we need all this?
Right.
And the thing that people don't realize is that like there's a compound effect to everything, right? So like if you have all these trays, right, then like you're putting more costs. And these are I think these are the things that surgeons don't think about, right? It's like the cost of SPD. Right?
Well, I brought up Matrix and the 23 trays for that pedicle screw system. So the really good sales consultants figured out which 7 were the key ones, or they contaminated the organization and they broke it down to 5 to 7 key ones. But then you still have sales consultants getting a call from a surgeon and somewhere in Central America, Central United States, and saying, look, we need it tomorrow. And now they've got 7 to 10 trays they've got to ship and distribute, and guess what? Maybe the case will happen, maybe it won't, maybe it didn't get there on time. The cost just of shipping all of these ridiculously complicated systems is obscene, and it's waste. One of the things we're using AI for is to now that it's multinodal, is you can identify tools, we're building this into our architecture. You can do timestamps of tools, or you can do percentile use. So these are the 90 percentile use tools, the ones that this team uses 90% of the time. Well, guess what? 90% of the tools are used less than 10% of the time. So why are they on the primary trays?
Right.
They should be in the back. They should never be open. Isn't
it amazing when you start? I mean, I love the application of certain, like, whether it's like economics or physics theories to real life, and like it just makes so much sense. So like in this case, it's a Pareto's principle. But it's amazing when you apply Pareto's and you really force yourself to that 80-20, which in reality I think it's more aggressive. Like you just stated, like most things it's like 10-90 or 199, right?
Absolutely. No, and we see that so much. And so and think of the reciprocal effect on SPD management or organizational management or storage or preparing for cases. And so you start looking at balls and boxes in the life cycle of the surgical episode of care. Oh my God, there's so many pinch points. So, I mean, you're really looking at a complex system like surgical healthcare. And one of the funny things is like people ask, what are we solving and what is our solution? Well, my instinct is we're solving surgical disorganization. Well, every great team says, what do you mean? Whoa. Heels dug in. We're exceptionally well organized. But we're all, me too, I'm frustrated as hell. We're all working in chaos. And we become exceptionally well organized, but using processes from an old century. We haven't embraced any kind of deep analytics. We haven't embraced any software management. We do of the hospital and we do of medical records, and it's done terribly in my opinion. But what we don't do is organize our efficiency.
Let me ask you a question, and this actually I've never talked about this on the podcast. So there was a time when I really got my start, like, developing some kind of thought leadership on LinkedIn. It was many, many years ago. I was writing articles. There was a time where like back in 2015 where LinkedIn was optimizing articles. So I wrote an article a week. There's one article I wrote that really pissed off a CEO that I used to work for. And it's mainly because I wrote the article about like why surgeons don't want AI in their operating room. Yeah. And the guy just read the headline.
You were way ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Thank you. The guy just read the headline and lost his mind over it. And I remember, like, I was a kid, but I told him, I was like, well, did you read the article? Because the article was essentially pro AI, and it's like, this is why surgeons will want it. But initially, my thing is that if you look at surgeon culture and history, like people think about surgery the last 20, 30 years, there's hundreds of years of history for surgeons that like mind share and psychology is rooted. And one of those things is secrecy and keeping to yourself, right? Because of competition, et cetera. And that still exists today. And my my perspective is that for the most part, a lot of surgeons subconsciously don't want this stuff in the OR because they're like, I don't want people, I don't like, this is how I do things. I don't want to be criticized. I don't want it out in the open. Do you feel like that's one of the obstacles to adoption for eXeX?
It's a good question. It creeps in here and there in the experience, but I'm not. I guess I'm biased in the sense that I've used as first movers people that I have immense respect for and who
Totally.
like are true masters. And there's a level of security that emotionally you get when you deal with that class of surgeons that I don't perceive or feel any protectionism at all.
I agree. I agree.
Um,
And I think it's funny because I see that in robotics where at least early days of robotic surgery, there are two types of early adopters. One is surgeons who are above the age of 50, who are really confident, settled into their practice, and they're like, yeah, you know what, I need to optimize these areas, and they're okay with that. And the other one is surgeons who are less than 5 years into practice, right? Who are new enough, they're like, yeah, I'm good, but I wanted a better edge. Everybody else in the middle was like very protective and very touchy about it. I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, no, so that'll be interesting when we get to herd effect. I don't know if you've read the book Tribal Leadership. It's a great book. One of my partners turned me on to it, and you look at, level 5 versus level 1. And personally, I don't even want to work with level 2 and 1. Toxic dysfunction. I don't like
patience for level, for those ones, yeah.
So on a good day, we always feel like we're a level 4 surgical team that peaks into level 5 constantly with nonverbal flow state, but we have to be level 4 and organized and communicative and ego strong but not arrogant. There's so many qualities you have to have individually to achieve that. But so our first movers are clearly level 4. But we know we're going to go past first mover to early adopter and then herd effect. But I think the reality is we've already got data, we've already got experiential value that shows that we can take a team that struggles often and improve their onboarding, improve their performance, improve their own success relatively quickly. I mean, especially you bring a new scrub tech into an environment, a lot of times it takes 2 months to really get them up to speed. We're getting them to be familiar with all organizational aspects of a given surgery in less than 2 days. So it's just radically accelerating performance. So the young guys, the ones young to mid who don't have the power, who don't have the commodity base, our commodities as surgeons is our community. And if you don't have a community of followers, you have zero power in your facility. When you have a tremendous community that you bring to a facility, therein lies your power. So they're looking for a way to build their community, their power. They're looking for things that are going to make them shine and make them perform better, to give them more, you talked about balance earlier. And, one of the things that happens a lot is somebody who wants to do a cheap shot at what I'm trying to do, who know that people characterize me as being fast. I've 25 years, I bring people to my OR to watch because I know what it's like Eminem and Lose Yourself. You tell them what they're about to say about you before they do it. I absolutely know what people are going to say. And the thing is, when they watch, we're not rushing at all. We're listening to great music. It's nonverbal flow state. We have a very lean equipped field. My steps are so precise. I never go backwards in a step. I finish every step. I don't chicken scratch. I'm very, so it's just an effortless moving symphony that we aspire to. But, we're not trying to make surgery faster. We're trying to eliminate dead time. And there's a big difference. And every surgeon understands the frustration and the futility of, oh my God, I've got 3 more cases. I've got patients in clinic to follow. My kid's got a game at 7. At this rate, I'm already an hour and 45 minutes behind, and I haven't even started my second case. And it's not because of the surgery; it's because of the room was backwards, and you gotta, or you know what, it's upside down, and you don't have any of the trays, or they set it up for the wrong case, or I mean, just every one of those micro moments times a career is excruciating. So I think by the time we get to prove through our first movers and our early adopters the value prop in a big visual way, I think we'll be able to navigate the insecurity of the herd. And that's my opinion. We'll see. We're pretty early.
Yeah, well, so on that topic, and by the way, like for me, I kind of, it's funny. I spoke to like a few months ago. There's a very senior and well known exec from the early days of Intuitive. And so I won't mention his name, but I think some people know what I'm talking about. But I remember talking to him, and he asked me, he's like, Omar, how old are you again? I'm like, I'm 37. He's like, so you still don't know who you are, huh? I'm like, yeah, I don't. And so I think it's a coming of age kind of thing where you start figuring out like who you are. For me, I definitely know that I'm a startup guy, but for you, looking at some of the adopters right now who've adopted eXeX, is there a theme there? Like, why did because there's so many reasons why you can adopt eXeX in terms of surgical optimization. Is there a theme yet, or there aren't enough adopters yet to see a theme? Now it's kind of like a little bit the data is a little bit scattered.
No, there is clearly a theme. I mean, well, are you talking about surgeon archetype, like their personality profile?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what brings them to eXeX, and what's the real reason they end up adopting?
No, they're people who are problem solvers. They're people who recognize that there are pieces of their puzzle that are inadequate, and they're just highly motivated to continue the pursuit of optimization of their environment. They're not so full of themselves in their daily routine where we're as good as we can be. No, we all have a future version of ourselves that I hope we aspire to. I mean, I've never been at a moment where I thought, I am as good as I ever need to be. I don't need to improve. Everything is perfect. Perfect's the enemy of good. I get it, but man, I want to be better. Surgery's humbling. It doesn't matter how good you think you are. It will hit you in the face in a blink. And if you're not paying attention, maybe you skirt around that. But and not no, and I'm not somebody who like points fingers at, well, this happened because of this or this happened. No, it happened on my watch. It's my problem. When anything goes wrong, you feel it if you're paying attention. So I've got a group of first movers who, archetype wise, are highly responsible humans who always see value and improvement and transcendence. And if you look at the history of medicine, I'm grateful that I grew up in like the golden era of surgical healthcare, because I guess these days a lot of the pioneers would be called cowboys. But I mean, imagine developing open heart surgery. Imagine doing cardiac bypass on a cranial aneurysm in front of the pons. Imagine, the crazy stuff that was being first done in the 80s and 90s. These days, forget it. There's no way you could do that now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And even me, like when I look at some of my old anatomy texts and everything, I'm like, man, I was like, there was a time where nobody knew how this all worked, and like they're back in the 1600s and everything, digging up graves, and for example, I always tell people, I'm like, how we know how all the cranial nerves work? I'm like, how do you think that occurred? Because we've known that for a long time. Like, it's because like somebody literally did like, they cracked the cranium open and started testing. I mean, a lot of it's brutal. Like the history of medicine is brutal, when you look at it. But something I really, for me, like when I look at eXeX, and especially the way you described it, I love the idea of like, so Nike celebrates great athletes. It sounds like what eXeX is doing is, because Nike's just like apparel, right? But eXeX is like optimization data. You guys are trying to create and celebrate great surgeons.
You're exactly right. And I had forgotten that tagline when we talked about it earlier. But no, that is exactly what we're doing. Best practices. So, you take someone like Rick Geyer at TBI in Dallas and in Plano. Rick immediately thought, oh my God, my fellows, when they leave, they can at least start with a surgical holographic pref card environment that gives them, a foundation to build their own customization on. Instead of just going to pure creation mode and start with chaos and then evolve into something that sort of works. There is so much opportunity to analyze data, analyze best practices, analyze efficiencies and flow. One of my theories is like, is it possible to change the standard a little, where instead of every surgeon having just a massively custom setup and an organizational chart and sequence and everything else, maybe we'll get to the point where procedures are actually optimized and everything is plus minus 10% of one best practice, always evolving through micro expression. I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. Is personal nuance too important and too stylized in surgery? It is historically. What will it be as we really start scrutinizing best practices? I'm not sure.
Do you think, there's always this idea of the art of surgery? Do you feel like the art of surgery is starting to die and people are demanding more of the science of surgery?
I think, the data compulsion is pushing people towards evidence-based decision making, but the problem is, the broad categories. So when you talk about evidence-based and you're comparing, a TLIF done 1995 style or a TLIF done 2023 style with advanced technique, advanced implants, advanced approach strategies, it's apple and orange. So you can find data that supports evidence, that supports, opinions for anything, depending on how you organize it. So it's very nuanced, it's very stylized, and it's obviously important to have data, but I do think the context of the data needs to be better understood, and therein lies the art.
I agree.
So it's a delicate balance between the extreme subtlety of art and data done honestly, transparently, and with clarity. But therein lies the problem, the lack of clarity and transparency.
I completely agree. And I think this is the thing that people forget about data. I wonder if there's some weird parallel between surgeons and marketers, because both of those groups have no formal training in understanding data and statistics. And I always have to remind people, look, don't forget that data's telling you what happened in the past. It's not going to predict what's going to happen in the future necessarily. And I think a lot of
garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm wondering if for the surgeon who's listening right now, whether it's a spine surgeon or orthopedic surgeon, if they wanted to try eXeX, what's the easiest, best use case to do it? What's that process look like? If a surgeon says, "Hey, I really want to try eXeX or I want to trial it," what does that process look like, and what's the case selection look like?
Honestly, so I'll give you our profile. I'm pretty advanced in my spine career, where I have the luxury of only doing really 4 procedures: cervical and lumbar.
That's amazing. So you just hyper focus on just perfecting 4 procedures. Just out of curiosity, I have to ask, what are the 4 procedures?
Cervical lumbar micro decompression and anterior cervical approach reconstruction, arthroplasty or fusion, and posterior lumbar reconstruction TLIF. That's my repertoire, and I'll compete in those things with anybody, anytime. I love competing, and I always love to learn from people that challenge me. So, but that's what I focus on, and then I'm more interested in. I've done ALIF, I've done XLIF, I've done OLIF, I've done all the 360 degrees around the inner body approach strategies, minus the transrectal route. Never done that one, but I would rather be best at what I do relative to my capabilities than chase the perfect solution and be average at it, because I've got a different solution for every subtlety. I've found that I can beat me versus me by doing a deep dive into a procedure and learning it at such an extreme level that I can handle virtually anything within my toolbox. with that approach. And that's where I am now with cervical arthroplasty and with TLIF. And it's very, very rare for that to be otherwise. On the other hand, I don't think any surgeon should ever do something because it's the best procedure if they're not very good at it. And there's a lot of pressure that exists in standard of care discussions that kind of pushes surgeons towards a technique that they may not have the support, like ALIF, for instance. A lot of communities just don't have good anterior access, or if the surgeon wants to master it themselves, they live in a liability environment where it's really not financially safe to do it yourself. And, so there are reasons why you shouldn't force it. And so I just think it's a lot more complicated than what it seems. But yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of being the best you can be at what you're good at.
Yeah, and going back, because I didn't mean to get you off on that one, but like going back to the surgeon archetype and like the case selection. So maybe starting off with spine surgery. If a spine surgeon is thinking about trialing eXeX, like, is there a specific case you guys recommend, and what does that all look like?
Sorry. Yeah, I went way off piece there. Yeah,
I told you that's what we like to do on the show, so it's totally okay. You're in the right place to do that.
Yeah, no, I think your more complex procedures gives you a better opportunity to perceive value. So, like how many consumable use, waste of consumables, the number of tools you have per case, the number of trays you have per case. We're talking about an environment where we have a front side and a back side to eXeX deliverable. The front side is viewer mode, which allows for organization of everything going into a room for a case, for a surgery, for a surgeon. So it's set up, it's weight, which trays, which consumables, which equipment pieces, where, the orientation of the room, left, right, high, low, where does the microscope go, where does the fluoro go? All that's viewer mode. Experience mode is, okay, now you penetrate the sterile field. The headset goes on the scrub tech. The scrub tech is now managing a digital twin holographic universe within the field and managing consumables and reference guides. And, I call the Mayo stand the transition zone. For every phase of every surgeon's case, the Mayo stand looks different. And we like our scrub techs to be caught up and not modifying on demand, but setting up the Mayo for what's coming. So there's a different flow that you get into where it's always next, always there, versus what do you need? I need what I need every moment right now, and so this experience mode gives that scrub tech that ability to project what's coming at all times, not only technically, but which tools, the chaos on a Mayo stand. It can get pretty busy up there if you're double, triple loading pieces of a case. So one of the things like our AI, I use AI for it in this solution, is we feed anonymized op reports. Every surgeon has their own unique sequence. Like I put screws in first. I put headless screws in first, fascitectomy for inner body second, and I do my direct decompression last. A lot of people do all the exposing stuff first and then put screws in and then do their inner body work. To me, I'd much rather do my direct decompression after I've done my indirect, because the indirect makes it safer, easier, and it turns out I can be less deconstructive because I don't have to do as much to validate patency or decompression if I've already done the indirect. So that variability in sequence can apply to organization for any surgeon and any team, where they're just on time. Everything's exactly where it's supposed to be, exactly when it's supposed to be. It's happy, it's effortless. To me, effortless surgery is the best outcomes. Nonverbal communication are the best teams, and we see that at time and time again with our first movers and our test sites. But the one thing a lot of our test sites have is variability of team members, and the pandemic really changed that. Like even people I know who have always had their own team all of a sudden don't have that security, because there's a mobile workforce right now for a variety of reasons, and I won't get into them. But it's really important still to maintain that flow and that precision and that sequence.
No, absolutely. And I think that mentioning that, like, aside from variability in the workflow, the variability in the team, I mean, maybe you have a team like that they're going to stick around with you. Maybe you're part of a physician-owned ASC, but like there's going to be a day where somebody's on vacation or sick or something, and so you can't afford to have that kind of variability, right? And I think that the only way that you control for variability, it's kind of like what Peter Drucker says, like anything that's measured will get managed, but if it's not measured, you can't manage it. And so just like if you don't know like these subtleties, right? I mean, I'll tell you the one thing that a very close friend of mine, he has a venture-backed company. He's raised, I think, like over 20 mil right now for his company. He called me the other day and we were talking, and he's like, oh, are you sharpening your business sword? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, what do you? And he started asking me some questions, like some basic questions about my cash flow, my income, my balance sheet. And I realized I'm like, oh, I'm not that sharp on there. And he's like, yeah. He's like, you can, just raise prices in some ways, like, but you're not going to build a big business if you don't know how these formulas work and the levers to pull. I'm like, you're absolutely right. Including, I have a high margin business, but still just managing costs. And I think surgeons is the same way, which is like, if you don't know like your setup time, like some basic, I guarantee you, if we go and polled every surgeon on LinkedIn, it'll be less than 1% that'll be able to tell what is your average setup time for this procedure. I guarantee you that.
No, exactly. And like in our system, as the scrub tech is clicking off the phases of the case in the reference guide, it's time stamping every move. 27 seconds for screw 1, 28 seconds screw 2, a minute and a half for screw 3. Why? Oh, it turns out we dropped the drill. Why did we drop the drill? Well, it was in the way, it got tangled and it fell off the floor. So what did that do? That influences where you put the drill. Just all sorts of little awareness things that you perceive. One of the things I learned right away, I went in arrogantly thinking, well, we already know what we're doing. This isn't for us. Well, I have my own facilities. It's basically any waste is out of my pocket. Right off the bat, first week, turns out I was opening 4 Surgiflows every single case. Turns out I used 0.8 per case. Wow, that's $800 every case, every single one, that one commodity, just in the garbage. And, those little granular things affect the economics, affect the performance, affect the outcome. People kind of assume that surgery execution is like F1 and an F1 pit stop, and it is not. It can become that. And I would argue, my team pulls that off. But it's incredible how many surgical teams really just can't achieve anywhere near F1. And why not? I don't, if it were you on the table, if it were my mom on the table, every surgery is equally priceless to the person you're about to do. And I think there's too much tolerance to mediocrity in execution and performance. And, oh, well, it's the best we can do. It's okay. No, it really isn't. There's a higher standard. And, there is no finish line, another roten line. I will always push. And people get offended by a constant need for change or improvement. So be it. That's an archetype too. I recognize that's an archetype. That's okay. It's good for them. But you know what? The people that I want to be talking to, they can relate to what I'm talking about. They know that they want better, and they might come up with reasons and excuses. But at the end of the day, we all want better, because it's so stressful to know it could have been better, but it wasn't. And nowhere does it feel as hard as in surgery. I've done a lot of things in my life. This is so exposing.
Yeah, and I wonder if like that's the reason why most surgeons, they kind of hide behind this, which is like, you do the surgery, if the outcome is good, there's no reason to go back and scrutinize all these things. But I think it's kind of like one of those things where, and this is where I feel like industry plays a really important role, because nobody's going to watch the surgery as closely and objectively as like a third party, right? It's rare to have a surgeon who's going to be that. I mean, look, you're a spine surgeon, the one thing I hear from every spine surgeon I talk about, I have no revision cases. I'm like, got it. 0 revisions. And like, yeah, got it. All right. Every surgery is perfect. And I think that, maybe, and this is where I think personally, social media can play a really important role, which is, somebody has to go first in being vulnerable. And we see this, it's a very interesting psychology of the masses happening on the LinkedIn. And I'm seeing it across specialties, but specifically it's starting with ortho, where orthopedic surgeons, who, let's just face it, they're kind of like, they're the jocks. of the hospital, right? There's a lot of pride. They're cool. Everybody thinks they're cool. But more and more we see surgeons like, Moby Parsons, Corey Cowan, Ira Kirschenbaum. I mean, the list goes on. They'll post cases and say, this was what I did for this case. What would you guys do? And then seeing like a very open, extremely public discussion. And I think that's going to be good, because then it becomes a much more about like, hey, surgery has gotten to this point. We can all work collectively and kind of be open book with each other so that we can figure out how do we take it to the next level. And I think that's why this is a really important time in history. But the only way this technology is going to actually help is through the willingness of like early adopters and surgeons who are like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to kind of stick my neck out there a little bit, but it's going to make the biggest contribution to medicine.
No, I think you're absolutely right. 10 years ago, I was anti-social media. I was one of those old guys. And why did I dive in? I dove in because I started realizing through my kids and their friends that, like it or not, it's here. And you better learn how to engage. You better learn how to understand it. Good, bad, and ugly, you will be affected by it. So the best way I know to learn something is to dive all in. So, people criticize me. I use it too much. I'm learning. Every single post I make, I learn something. I am understanding the emotional intelligence of it. I'm understanding the reaction of the universe to the way you say things, how you say things, always analyzing, always watching. But, one of the cool things is over the last decade is, to your point, I think in general, the surgical group, the medical group at large is more introspective now than it was a decade ago. A decade ago, everything was happy. Economics was solid. Everybody was doing well. Nowhere near as stressful an era as the 20s. In the 20s, reimbursement, everyone talks about a 4% annualized drop in revenue. It's garbage. They've bundled every frickin' code on the map. So where you used to get 5 codes with a 3% decrement, now you get that converted to 1 code with a 3%, and they say it's a 3% decrement. No, you actually lost 4 codes. I mean, it's a massive hit, and practice is independent, can't sustain it across the board. So to the point about the business of it, you have to be very granular. You have to look at the nuts at a very detailed level if you want to have an independent practice. And we've always been very successful at it, but it's been stressful lately. So I notice a lot of surgeons are opening up, communicating, talking, expressing what you said, vulnerability, whether it's in the burnout stuff or the economics or the practice or procedural efficiencies. We're at a point in spine where, okay, well, most people have tried just about everything. So now we can probably start figuring out what makes the most sense for a surgeon, for his community. And really, based on their nuances, subtleties, experience, and environment. It's more than just this widget is best. It's not that simple. It never will be that simple.
100%. And I think, some physicians get really upset when I say this, but it's true. A lot of what we see in healthcare today, like it or not, was, for better or worse, was because when healthcare started to change, physicians, and I'm talking about decades ago, were like, well, I don't want to deal with that, the quote unquote business of medicine. I don't want to. So I'm just going to focus on patient care. It's like, okay, well, if you don't want to deal with it, somebody else is going to. And those people, are lobbyists and lawyers. And especially surgeons, unfortunately.
Administrators. Everyone's complaining about the 400% increase in administration. Well, maybe if we weren't complaining about having to do the business of medicine, we wouldn't need so many administrators.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that maybe now, and I'm starting to see a lot of different models come out and everything, because people are fed up and they're willing to change, because it's not like the old, and I would say in a very funny way, the industry parallels what their customers are doing, which is like, well, if I just keep doing what I'm doing and just work harder, it'll take care of itself. And we got to a point now where that no longer works. And now I think the only way to make a better system is to break the system. I don't even think about disruption within the hit system, because you're still using its old parts. It's almost like you have to either burn it down or just go do something radically different. I mean, look, one thing I would love to see, because I think thanks to like Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia, and everything, there's this consciousness around longevity, biohacking. I would love it where, let's just look at orthopedic surgery, where you go to an orthopedic surgeon's office to get assessed for your knee or hip or something, but within their office, either they have it or they're trained in it where you can do all kinds of other things before surgery. Like it's like, hey, you know what? We're going to do this approach in physical therapy. We're going to do these kind of lifestyle changes, everything. And then if we have to, you know, because then you have something to supplement your practice. So now a surgeon's not just making their money just through surgery alone, you know?
Yeah, no, my practice has always been very diversified, holistic based. You know, I'm very holistic about how I recommend surgery. Like I don't see spine surgery being valuable if your goal isn't to achieve functional recovery. So how do you never achieve functional recovery? You don't commit to prehab. You don't commit to fitness. You don't commit to some performance environment. And, you know, the goal isn't to disable people. The goal, and I have a very luxurious practice in that, you know, you could argue I censor people who don't have goals. I don't look at it that way. I celebrate people who have lost who they want to be when they grow up, regardless of their age, and they want it back, and they're willing to fight for it. And every now and then you have to throw surgery in there to truly fight for that. And that's my whole practice is built on that philosophy. So no, it is. And by the way, to your point, it's a multi-dimensional practice. It's more like sports ortho. I attribute it a lot to my mentor, Al Roden, but Dick Stedman and Jim Andrews inspired me in a lot of ways. A lot of the early arthroscopic orthopedists who used that tech to eventually figure out it was the philosophy of rapid recovery, early mobilization-based orthopedic surgery. Well, vis-a-vis spine surgery in the 20s, you know, my practice is 100% rapid recovery, early mobilization spine surgery. And, you know, and there's a cultural value there. And I stole it from sports ortho. So, you know, I think that has opportunity in other specialties as well.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Well, Dr. Masson, I really appreciate you coming on. Just kind of, as we sort of wrap up, I like to do a quick couple like fast, fun, rapid fire questions. So I got a couple of them for you. So yeah. So first one is medicine is full of continuing education. Business is absolutely about continuing education. Is there a book that you feel like you recommend most often to other surgeons, professionals, and what would that be?
There's so many different.
It doesn't have to be business or medicine. It could be self-development, anything, religion, whatever.
Honestly, right off the bat, I'm going to say what I alluded to earlier with tribal leadership, because too many surgeons grasp that the institutional environment that we find ourselves in is dysfunctional, but they don't have a way of articulating it. They don't have a way of understanding it. And I passionately believe you need to understand how to break the institutional org chart, if you will, down into granular detail to have a fighting chance of navigating it. So tribal leadership has truly changed my method for how I engage all of my industrial partners, if you will. And whether it's an implant company or a hospital system or a payer system, it's all an extension of how you break down the organization that you're aligned with and battling at the same time.
Totally. I love that. All right. One last one for you. So I used to say that this is a billboard, but now we're in the digital age. So I'm going to add text message. But if every spine surgeon in America, let's say across the world, woke up every day and they saw a message, a message notification on their cell phone, and they also saw a billboard with a message going into work every single day, what message would you put on there? And it would be on there for a full year. What message would you want them to see every single day and think about?
Oh boy, that's a big one.
Take it on.
Yeah, I've got to take my time. I don't know if taking my time will help. Usually this is a knee jerk. What message should every spine surgeon reflect on, see every morning when they head off to the world? Make your world a better place today, period.
Love it. Love it. Dr. Masson, it was such a pleasure having you on. We're definitely going to have you back on, but this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. Quick reminder to our audience, if you're a clinician, whether you're a physician, a nurse, a PA, the State of MedTech covers your CMEs, and so you can get a free CME for listening to this episode. That's one AMA PRI Category 1 credit. Go ahead and click the show notes below and unlock that CME reflection. All you got to do is write a few sentences of what you learned. And if you're a medtech company who wants to start putting more CMEs to their content and events, go ahead and hit me up. With that being said, I'm your host, Omar Khateeb. This has been another episode of the State of MedTech, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has an executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.